Hello, everybody. My name's Milan Starcic. Welcome to Freedom Rising, a podcast dedicated to empowering individuals on the journey to personal growth, lasting serenity, and freedom from addiction. Tune in and join the movement. Your journey to freedom starts here. We neither represent, promote, or demote any 12-step program or organization. We are merely souls on the path of recovery with the desire to expand our lives and experiences and share them with you. Hello, everybody.
Hello,
Welcome
everybody.
to the 79th Recovery Freedom Rising podcast. I'm Milan Starcic with co-host Gabbi Villarrubia. I'd like to welcome you, Gabbi, to the podcast for your first time. And I'm just
Thank
wondering,
you, Milan.
would you like to share a little bit about yourself just so the audience could get to know you?
Absolutely. Thank you first and foremost for having me on your podcast. It was, I lived in a town, Sayulita, Mexico. I just moved like 10 minutes down the road to a town called San Ignacio. And I've been in Mexico for 19 years and involved with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for like 6.5 years now. One of the awesomest things about our town is we have so many cool people coming through it in recovery and out of recovery. And meeting you, and as I've shared with my family leading up to sitting here, is an example of that. You know, you don't know who you're going to sit next to and how long they've been in Sayulita. For you, it might be the first time you think they've been there. And so anyway, thank you. I'm stoked that we met, and I feel we'll know each other for a long time. My wife and I first came to this part of Mexico. We just celebrated 19 years of moving here, but it had been 20 odd years that we came here on one of our first travel dates. And then ended up marrying here a few years later. And then committed to trying to live here in 2006. We moved down here. So we've been here a minute, just been 19 years. I've been a lifelong, definitely as early as I could, student of the party. I grew up with great parents and honestly, just a wonderful immigrant story. I immigrated from Argentina as a 3-year-old child, and I immigrated to Mexico years later again. I had a lot of idols growing up, and they were all drinkers. You know, my dad drank, and he was just a really great, fun guy. So I think that really got into my head on that front. As soon as I saw some of my first rock and roll idols, I was like, I don't just want to be Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue. I see he shoots up, and I thought that was, probably a really cool fucking idea, And so it really, I have trauma, and there are things that have come out because of this program. But I really wanted to be a lot of these guys and follow that kind of like recipe, this diagram on how to be a certain way. And a lot of that was debauchery. I have a brother who was a disaster and never managed his party. And I always, because of that, swore I was going to keep my shit together. And I was really functional forever. I mean, really the whole time in the States, I have, a beautiful partner for many years. We can go into that in other ways, but coming to Mexico in a wonderful land where tequila does flow and it's part of our business, over those first 10 years of being here, things accelerated dramatically. And a lot of my recovery story is here in Mexico. There were dark times before that. Obviously, I've been I would say an active using an addiction since my early 20s. But a lot of the big stuff, including my recovery, happened here in Mexico. And what's awesome is it all is beautiful because it led me to sit right here, right fucking now. And I'm stoked to be here. I think that's a little bit about me.
I love that.
I love ponies and rainbows and heavy metal and punk rock and jazz. And I know we talked about music and had a connection there, playing a band here in Sayulita, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, like you and your wife are in a band, right?
Yeah, we've been in a band for 14
called,
years.
and tell everybody the band name. You could plug your band here for people who want to listen to some music of yours.
You can find us on Spotify. You could be one of our under 1,000 fans, and that's a hefty number. I think the under 1,000 might be somewhere in the 300s. Um, we work on Los Gatos Negros de Sayulita, and we started out as a cover band in this town, playing punk rock songs, kind of a mix of stuff that people liked hearing at bars, but always wanted to. I come from a band background, like kind of playing in a lot of kind of punk, Lords of the New Church, Hanoi Rock sort of stuff. My wife's family has a musical background, but we wanted to always do something a little different, and we slowly transitioned into doing covers of songs that no one really knows or are kind of older songs and really punking them out. And we've gotten to a point now where we have a sound. So we kind of like take these
Oh yeah.
songs, but we sound like those Gatos Negros, and so we love what we do. It's awesome to be. I'm 55 and change, and I don't want bigger and better. I love what I have. I'm pretty grateful for it, and so that's a it's a freedom to not be seeking, and we don't seek as a band. We live in a little Mexican town that when we play maybe once or twice a year, it's always a big deal and packed. And I mean, I couldn't get that in San Francisco, and so we're in a cool situation for how we play music. And yeah, our stuff's kind of fun. We do lately. We've really been doing old Mexican songs, like we tell Mexican kids or adults, this is what your grandparents listen to, and it's like some old stuff punked out. So check it out; it's fun.
It's really awesome. I really liked what I listened to. Los Gatos Negros de Sayulita. Everybody is out there. That means the black cats of Sayulita. For anybody who doesn't speak Spanish out
Yes,
there.
yeah. And when we first got to Sayulita, town was very different. The dogs on the street, which there's so many dogs. Now they're very cultured. They're like they're
There's Great Danes in
well
Sayulita
dressed
now.
hooligans. Oh man, the dogs know exactly how to work the crowds, and back then it wasn't the case. The dogs were in bad shape, and the only cat, like, there were no stupid cats in Sayulita. They said, and you wouldn't see many because there were too many dogs out. Like, kind of, I notice now, like, there's in the little town we live in, which is pretty rustic, like there's a bunch of cats sitting in the middle of the street with a bunch of dogs, like, and I just laugh. That's nothing that you'd ever see back in the day.
No,
and
the
uh and
dogs were
so
hungrier.
yeah, and so besides the black cat connotation, which is cool, like, we just thought that there weren't a lot of cats in Sayulita back then, except the ones hiding out. So blah blah, there you go.
Nice. So I asked this question to everybody their first time on, and I gave you about 3 minutes now to prepare in your mind for it. But there was a moment for me where my life, with recovery and the program, kind of changed, and I call it, sparking a recovery fire. But you know, I got taken with the program. I love it. It's been a positive change here in my life. And so I'm going to ask you, what was the pivotal moment when the program sparked a recovery fire in your heart?
Well, it's a great question. I'm glad you didn't tell me days ago. I would have overthought that shit. Um, my journey's gotten awesomer and awesomer in recovery, and mostly because a big part of it is I relapsed now almost 11 months ago. Um, so, I came into the room January 6 years ago. And I was alcohol sick. I was, waking up 2 hours before any alarm clock to throw up, and would need to drink to steady the hands and do all that stuff. And that would calm me down. And then as I'm like setting up breakfast for the then young kids, at that point, my son will gauge around his age. He was around 9 years old, give or take. And then, be taking shots while they're eating their breakfast, and got steady. And I talk about coming into the room like really sick. And so the I talked to some of my first sponsor, was the first person. We're a tiny town. I would consider that I was incredibly functional. When I talk about, especially the early days of recovery, where we're shameful, we feel bad about those days. You wonder what people saw, even because you're just out. And I often hear, oh, it didn't seem that bad and all these things, but it was bad, you know. And the important part is what I knew was bad, how I felt. Um, so coming into that room, and I had my last drink the night before I came into AA and sat down in that room. You know, the feeling that we get, that pink cloud is a real thing, and that pink cloud was there for, you know, a good portion of a year. Um,
To
and
somebody new though, to somebody new, describe what a pink cloud is to you.
uh,
Like just it just because I think there'll be somebody who's like, what does he mean, pink cloud?
no, man, and I'll explain it because it goes way back.
Mhm.
I'm one of those alcoholics and drug addicts that knew for 10 years that, man, if I could just fucking stop, if I could just stop, things would be okay. Like the world's at the tip of my fingers. And, you know, it was real functional and all of this, but I just knew that those conversations were inside for a long time, man. I didn't want to
Mm.
bring them out. So that pink cloud is the physical and spiritual, I wouldn't say spiritual yet, the emotional representation of the achievement of stopping and not dying. Like
Yeah.
literally, like I'm still here. And then after a short time, I'm still kind of me. Like I'm not furious at the world and I can kind of watch my wife have a drink. You know, it's weird, but I can. Um, it felt like a beautiful accomplishment and, you know, a feeling. We think we're in bliss when we're in addiction. We think we're actually achieving it every time we snort, shoot, any of these things. And we only see in the rearview mirror that that we weren't touching at all the light.
Mm.
Like we
Yeah.
really weren't. Or I can only speak of my experience. I'm not going to talk about anybody else, but I wasn't. You
Mm.
know, I probably touched the light the first time I did A, B, and C. And after that, now in the rear view, there was never the light got dim, you know. Exhausting, a lot of work. Exhausting is a big word because now I look back and I can make myself anxious at how much work it was to just keep going.
Yeah.
So to not have to do that work, to see the light in my wife's eyes, to see the pride that my son was having by realizing these things, that's the pink cloud, you know? Like it's in a way undescribable because you're told right away it won't last forever.
Mm.
And you know, it might this or that, you know? Um,
I know people with 40 something years in the program who are still in it. I think the
I can
pink
dig
cloud,
it.
I think the pink cloud, can be a situation of complacency.
Absolutely. You know, my journey wasn't there to stay in the pink cloud. And what is wonderful about I'm holding on to that question. I'm riding that because you know, part of my journey is that while that first year I was too in bliss to consider it, right in the door, I told my sponsor that I would like to continue smoking marijuana. And he said, well, I can't take you on as a sponsor. He did not believe in this. And I said, but I need to stop drinking. And he went to his 35-year sponsor, and the sponsor quoted the book, you know, and the only thing I need is a desire to stop drinking. And I had that desire. And he did, and he took me. And that was a really important step because I was at a very fragile point. Resentment would have been a big one towards the program. I got
Mm.
there later, so don't worry. I resented the program later. Um, so, you know, the part of the story is that in about a year after this wonderfulness, everything, I'd gotten this slim and stopped eating, and all of this shit happened as part of this pink cloud. Well, slowly I felt like, well, everything's beautiful and it couldn't be any better. I mean, really. And it started slow. Now I see it in hindsight, but I started smoking weed again.
Mm.
And to not drag this story on too long over the next 4 years, besides the fact that I obsessed on time, I was
Mm.
counting fucking days, man. I wanted a year to come, and then I wanted 2 years to come. And I mean, I had an obsession so funny on 5 years was a big deal to me. Like, and in my mind, but the closer I got, the more weed took the place of the big guy, and became the big guy. Never in my 35 years of wanting to be Cheech and Chong did I ever think that I wouldn't be 70 years old smoking weed.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever did I think in my whole life that that would not be a part of my life, which it is not today. And it just slowly, I didn't even know, man, but it just became its own thing. Never have I wanted to drink again. I was cured of that obsession, and I will always and am grateful. I still consider the day I stopped drinking as an important date in my life, and I talk about it every year, and it's just as important as anything because it led me to basically 4.5 years later. For I was not sick, quite the opposite. I was running 10Ks a day and super ridiculously skinny from exercising. And I was running upstairs every 20 minutes to smoke weed in the bedroom because the kids were around. And it had become, I remember towards the tail that it was like every time I would get stoned in my mind, it was like I'd injected something, which I used to. Like it was like, and I had to keep going to get there. And I fucking realized things were fucked up. And then I was resentful. And what had happened is I started not going to meetings, talking shit about meetings at home, and then showing up just to get my coin, like coming in 1 or 2 times before my year, which I had to really process that shame when I started recounting. So to the question, I knew I knew I'd fallen into a pit of addiction again, and it wasn't alcohol. And I was like, oh, fuck, look at this. And I knew I had to stop, and I made a decision to stop. I was also at that point medicating with Ambien and clonazepam to sleep, not in any sort of sense that seemed like a party sense. And little did I know, I had a goddamn fucking addiction to that shit too. Like really. And when you know what I knew is when I stopped smoking weed, and I wanted to sleep without those, and I didn't sleep for 2 fucking months. So my quitting, and so during this time, I ran into a fellow in the room. It was the middle of summer, throes of summer. Um, and this is now 2 years ago, give or take August. And I said, I'm back in the room. And he's like, we've missed you, man. And I went to lunch with them and I said, I told him the story about the weed. And he's like, you know what I think is I think you should start counting again. And I was like, are you fucking kidding? I've got all this time. He's like, I'm just telling you what I think. And it took a couple days alone to realize I've been on drugs the whole time. I've been counting days.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've never been fucking sober. I've never been sober.
Yeah.
That realization was beautiful. And it was in those days of my first true sobriety because I said, I'm going to sleep even if it takes months. Got obsessive with studying sleep, how to sleep. And I went through all of this stuff and nothing medical. And I've never taken another medical pill to sleep again. Over months, I started sleeping. I started reveling in the room. I was a newcomer. And I was like, I felt a variation. It was a mature pink cloud, I would describe it as. But there was a lot of luggage with it. So it wasn't that baby in the room, it was something else. And that was kind of cool, you know? And I would describe those days as being incredibly magical and me realizing that I had like talked down of AA, left the room for selfish reasons, had been a dry drunk for 2 years. I always wanted to know what that was about. I had been one for years. And so there you go. I restarted. I went into the room. I told them what happened. I started at day one. I dealt with that, which was humongous. It was a big freaking deal. And that was the first time in 35 years I'd been clean off drugs. And yet I had a knee surgery, and I can now tell you from right after I stopped taking the pain medicine, I knew that I would secretly take it. And that started basically what was the planning for what would become my relapse. And that is what I now see as addiction, which is um, the knowledge that I become a liar when I'm in active addiction. And basically, not 9 months almost to the day, um, I made a decision. Can you hear me? Seems like
I
we're
can
cutting
hear
out
you.
a
Yeah,
little bit
you
there.
froze up. You
Uh,
froze up after. Um,
9 months to the. Can you hear me a little bit?
you're perfect now. Yeah.
Okay. Um, 9 months to the day, I made a private decision to take a bunch of pills one night. And the biggest feeling I had the day after, I couldn't figure out what it was. It was just one night. The next day, I was like, why do I fucking feel so weird? I couldn't connect when I meditated. And the next day, I was like, oh, fuck, I have zero connection to my higher power right now. And I told my sponsor, he said, leave your sponsee right now. My sponsee, I was managing my first sponsee, second sponsee, and he wanted to keep doing mushrooms. He's like, you need to drop that right now. That is not the kind of person you need to work with. And I said, I want to tell everybody in the room. And it was the next meeting. I didn't even skip a meeting during all this, but I'd gone to a meeting the day before I relapsed and talked about honesty and all this fucking shit. And that was my relapse, and I told my wife that I had done this thing and hit it, really, this plan in my mind. It was the most innocent of all the bad things I've done. I was laying in bed watching a movie, everything was fine, nothing problem. No, it didn't leave the house, but it involved disconnecting from my higher power. It involved lying, and then I had to come back into the room and say I relapsed. And that was a restart. I was so glad to have the room. I was so glad to be in the program. And that moment was incredibly special too. And it's brought me to where I am now because I accepted myself as a true newcomer that day. Nothing's been the same. All the years, it's so great I got to be in the room all those years. Wonderful to have all these tools now. That was the start of my recovery, 11 months ago. And I feel this amazing, constant feeling. You talked about the long pink cloud. I don't want to give it a descriptive or a
Yeah.
color. My sobriety is, I never have been sober like this. Um, and it's amazing. And
Awesome.
so I've gotten a number of wonderful moments of knowing what this program means to me, and it being a program for living outside of the fact that I'm still considering myself a newcomer in recovery. It has taken me into a world that's completely different, including my spiritual journey, which is a further conversation.
Awesome. I love that. That was great, Gabby. I'm so glad you're here today. I'm so glad you're sharing with us. And, I think it's really important for people out there to know that these programs don't shoot their wounded. And the fact that you jumped right back in and went to a meeting like right after that, I think that just says something. Like it's proof that you don't have to run and hide in shame if something wrong happens. Like I'm sure that you received loved when you went back to the room, right? Like,
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
the
And it,
room. I mean, when do we not get love in that community? I mean,
mm,
it's pretty unbelievable. Like, we talk about it here. My wife and I, she's always like, she'll tell me, and she's been a member of Al-Anon during a lot of this, and like, it's it's an amazing therapy we get, but there's nowhere else you go where you get the sort of love and support that we get in our program and in our community. It is unbelievable, and it's a part of the miracle that we get to live through every day.
I always say, like, I have partied in Sailita for no, probably like 15 trips or something like that. And I lived there a couple winters and that. And I said, it's like once I brush the dust off of partying, there's this beautiful gem in Sayulita of recovery, you know, and it was really nice to be able to travel and to feel like that community is there. And you know, when I watched other people traveling, it was like people were kind of checking in, like, "Whoo, I just came to town." You know, like, is this a safe
Oh
place?
yeah.
And then they're like, we're like, yeah, 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 come on in. And then they're like, yeah, you know,
It's pretty amazing, in the early years and since I've gone to a few meetings in the States, very few. I feel very spoiled to have grown up in my home group in Sayulita.
yeah.
Um, in the summers, I'm not gonna lie, in my first years in the room, I hated the summers. It gets down to one or two people, and it's sweltering and all of these things, and a million reasons to not go. Especially once I got into my negative groove and my dry drunk. What's amazing is once I truly got into my recovery, the summers are the time when you're there and you feel like I'm in. It's very important that I'm here. It's important I'm here for whoever may walk in, and it's okay that I've heard this person's story, because then there's variations on that, and then you realize the importance of just being in that room and representing. And then in high season, like, I mean, there are days that it's a cinematic situation,
The
You've got
back
a
rows and
number of people
outside.
or a group that are all here and they're like, we're holding on by, we can barely imagine being in this town and staying sober. So
Yeah,
it's cool.
I loved it, and I was concurrently doing that beach meeting that I was starting, and that was like 1 to 7 people. So like I could have the really crowded meeting, with the Grupo Pacifico, and then it would be like me and Jenna, so, or like me
Yeah.
and Sayalita and someone else at the beach
Yeah.
meeting, and it was just great. It was a good balance for me of sort of like tight intimacy and then just large group experience. The large group experience. The one thing I loved though, like when I go to my home group here, right? There's an influx of people, but there's kind of like the steady, the home group itself. But the people coming through from all over made for really good variety in the shares. Like,
Yeah.
I found like it was like somebody would just drop in to say something I needed to hear that day, and then they
Yeah.
just never see him again. And I found
Yeah.
that to be really awesome. That it had kind of like a really cool, what I would call like transient recovery message, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's for
Yeah.
sure unique. And so many folks who have been there, like yourself, when they were still inactive and then when they are, in recovery. And like it really does. It brings a lot because we get what we hear in the room is what I'm there to hear.
Yeah.
It's early days. I think it's about what I'm gonna share, but it's actually it's what I'm hearing. And there's so much recovery to learn from. It's you know yeah.
I mean, yeah, there was spectacular recovery wisdom that I got to hear while I was there. Like there's been kind of some real pivots in my own personal program from my adventures down south. And I'm totally stoked about that. The more will be revealed, they say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to ask you a question, and
All
then
right.
you'll answer it. Then I'll answer it, and then you'll ask me a question. So we'll kind of keep going back and forth like that.
Sounds
Okay,
great. Is the
dokie.
connection working? Is the connection working pretty good for you?
I'm getting pretty much all of your audio and occasionally your videos freezing. So
Okay.
to
All right.
most people watching or listening, there's only been like a couple sentences that I couldn't understand,
Okay.
and
Great.
and it was like that for me when I was down there, and I didn't get a whole bunch of complaints. People were still tuning in and loving it. So, I'm
All right.
if
Sounds
I
good.
if I totally lost the point of what you're saying, I'll ask you to repeat.
Sounds great.
So, our spiritual connection leads us forward into a new life of joy, wholeness, and endless learning. We discover within ourselves a passion for living, Our experience has been transformed into tools for healing and keys to compassion. Has this been your journey in recovery? How or how not?
Oh man,
I know,
that's a heck of
deep.
a question.
I know, I love it.
That is deep. I feel like I need you to re-ask that
Yeah, I'll
again.
read
Do you
it.
mind?
Nope, I'll read it.
Yeah.
Close your eyes and let's go on a journey. Our
Yep. Yep.
spiritual
Yep.
connection leads us forward into a new life of joy, wholeness, and endless learning. We discover within ourselves a passion for living. Our experience is transformed into tools for healing and keys for compassion. Has this been your journey in recovery? How or how not?
Absolutely. Okay. I appreciate you repeating that. Here, I thought you were going to ask me, like,
What color
how
is
has
your
my favorite
dog?
beverage changed? Yes, over the years. You know, um, there's so much wonderful that comes out of recovery. My spiritual journey is what I'm sitting in and reveling in today. Um, so I do agree, absolutely. Um, I it's funny. I love to think of what I believed when I was in active using, and even during hippie days and things you would then describe as some sort of spirituality, and it never really was. It's the same decorations I used to that was Cheech and Chong about. I think I wrote you like I've shared. I always wanted to be that chill contemplator. Oh yeah, I never was. That wasn't the case. I've gained that in the sense of awe and wonder for the world, and by that extent, spirituality because of my sobriety. Um, there's so much, and I'm really honestly like I in the early days, the first pink cloud, those first years, you know, I always refer to that as being so cured of my sickness that it's impossible for it not to have felt like a spiritual revelation. But I don't think it was in hindsight. I think I got cured of a sickness at that point, and I wasn't cured, obviously, but I stopped drinking, and drinking was the big guy. And those feelings felt like, I had entered another realm, which I'm not taking anything away from it. But in hindsight, I just can't call it a complete spiritual rebirth. That has happened recently. That has happened when I truly entered a world of recovery and sobriety, sat
Half
all the way
measures
down.
availed us nothing.
And also, the biggest lesson that I get from Alcoholics Anonymous and from my recovery is that, I was raised a Catholic in a Latino family. My mom had Catholic guilt. I used to go to a school that had a church connected to it, and she would be like, I never go to church. God hates me. And I'd be like, why don't you just go to church? And she would just still not go and be sad about it. And so there's all this weird religious-y stuff. I used to kneel when I was a kid to pray, and then evolution was presented to me at like 15 or 16. And so like my hang up with a bearded old man and the word God is really thick and lifelong. And for years as an atheist, when I was in active use, active addiction, I would just say to everybody, we are just well-dressed wolves. We are just another level of animal who had decided to put on this outfit and can disconnect from, we die and we fall back into this earth, and there's some energy, but it's not beyond that. Alcoholics Anonymous has allowed me and shared with me that I don't need to know what's next. I don't need to know what's out there. I don't need to totally know what my higher power is. I stick on goddess still. Well, first of all, I'm very female heavy. I believe that females have the power. Oh, I could go on and on about that. So it's goddess was my higher power when I entered the room. I understand, and I think often and talk about it often, how the word God doesn't have to mean a guy, you know, but I still can say I'm not per se there, I guess. Do I need to be there? There is a saying I really love, which is God is what we call the blanket we wrap around the mystery to give it shape. All right. I didn't create that. God is what we call the blanket. We wrap around the mystery to give it shape. I love that idea that that it's just a word, the word God. The other day, I heard in a podcast um, that the word water won't get you wet. And I love the idea. It's just the word water, and I apply that to the word God. So, not having to have an answer to what's next and what's happening and what's this and what's that has really aided my spiritual journey. It's my mother just passed away 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
My deepest
It,
condolences, brother.
it's all good. She was suffering for years with Alzheimer's. Um, I prayed and I gained prayer during my sobriety, which is wonderful. I got to my stories are many in regards to praying and getting on my knees for the first time, telling her during COVID my dad passed away, and that helping and that was like the connection to prayer has been. I pray every day now. Um, it's this all multifaceted, and so it's a resounding yes. And I'm just a baby in this journey, and I don't plan to really finish it, but it's exciting for me. I hope that answered the question somehow.
Yeah, you know what? One thing about this show is that we're not necessarily answering the question. We're talking about what the question inspires us to speak on. You know, like
Yeah,
this isn't calculus. This is more like spiritual, just conversing, and that's it. That was
yeah,
wonderful. So I'm going to ask myself the question because I'm Milan, the absent-minded addict who forgets everything. Okay, our spiritual connection leads us forward into a new life of joy, wholeness, and endless learning. We discover within ourselves a passion for living. Our experience is transformed into tools for healing and keys to compassion. Has this been my journey in recovery? Well, like first of all, I also was raised Catholic. Like I was my Catholic career ended when my robe caught fire as an altar boy, and the priest came in, and I'm putting the fire out on my chest, and he's like swearing at me, telling me to get out of the church, and I looked at him and I said, "Nice show of forgiveness, Father. You did Jesus proud," and walked out the door. And that was the end of me in Catholicism, and like it wasn't a kind God. It was, like we had original sin. We had the Ten
yeah,
Commandments. By the time I was 8, I was like, man, I committed every sin but killing. And I'm like, I'm going to hell. I'm like, because the act of contrition only works if I'm contrite. And I wasn't contrite for things. It just wasn't the case. And I didn't think myself as a bad person, but I was obviously a sinner. So then there was going to be punishment somewhere down the road for me, and things didn't add up. Like original sin. I remember arguing with the priest and saying, Father, you say God's the all-loving being. He's like, yes, God is the all-loving being. And I said, okay. I said, my mom would forgive people for the original sin. I said, so my mom loves more than God. My mom's God. Let's just call it now, priest. And it just wasn't. It was kind of a skeptical little kid who just didn't have any spiritual connection to what was getting told to him.
yeah,
It was a system of punishment and reward. Like do this and we'll say you're a good boy, and don't do that and you're going to hell. And so I said this before on the show. Like I thought that my first spiritual, experience in the world was when I took acid when I was 15. Really, it was like watching the trees breathe and connecting with nature felt more spiritually connected than any other point that I'd had up until then. And it was a real disconnection. Like I've always felt energetically that there's more, because I have these
yeah,
strange experiences with people and connections that really are just like there's no science book that's going to explain what the experiences I've had and the connections I've had with people. And for myself, I write a lot of songs. I had the universe give me all these songs. Like, these songs do not come from me, not all of them. There's topics and words and stuff that are situations that I've never been on, you know, and I've always believed that I'm getting these songs from the universe. And it was my first week in treatment where we were having this discussion in group one, about faith. And I realized I had a higher power for songwriting, but not to save my own life. And I was like, whoa, like it really showed me for a second how far down I put my own value on my own life at that point. Like, you know, I was seriously hurting myself with substance by the end of my journey. You know, like literally thinking I'm going to die and still continuing using, you know, and so I was completely disconnected. Like, you know, you talked about feeling disconnected after your one night of relapse, you know, like I came in
Yeah.
at 51 years. I had 51 years of not giving my higher power a chance to show up, you know,
Hmm.
and in fact, like almost mocking it. And so inside that program, you know, what I realized is that it doesn't, okay, I like speaker tapes. Speaker tapes are good because I like to drive, right? And my sponsor sends me really good ones. And this old timer who was given this speaker session, I think it's Bob B or something like that, he was talking about how he wished one sentence was different in the big book, how he wished that it had been the God of our experience, not the God of our understanding. And how like so many people enter the program and waste 10 to 20 years worrying about trying to understand God instead of just the
Hmm.
experience. And it's
Yeah.
like, I can say that my connection to my higher power or the universe or whatever it is, you know, like for me, it really is that universal energy that I'm getting my songs from. You know, I'm just
Yeah.
like, now I am the song, you know, like in that sense. And and so I know what it feels like when I'm connected. And it's usually in retrospect. Like my moments of serenity or like real connection, I'm so there that I'm not thinking about being there. You know,
Yeah.
it's like later that day I'll be like, holy shit, that was fucking amazing earlier on. You know,
Right.
like and and so, you know, but that connection has brought me joy. Like I used to be 0 or 11. You know, you know, I was always an up drug kind of person, and it was like I was off sleeping for days, or I was shooting for 14, hitting 11, and I had no clue what serenity was. Like I had
Yeah.
no, I would be like, no, no serenity, slow renity, no way. Like I was just not into it, and and now, you know, like I really take a lot of joy from that connectedness, that wholeness, that integrity, you know, and like the learning, like the endless learning, you know, it's like you're a musician. When you start playing, you see how much there is that you're never gonna know on that instrument. But does that stop you? No, it's fascinating. And it's like that journey, you know, I call it like an upside down pyramid, where when I know one thing, there's this to see. And then I see this, and then I see this, and recovery is identical to that to me. And you know, and it's given me tools here. It's given me tools that have allowed me to start understanding myself and other people. And so this has definitely been my journey in recovery, and I love it. Like, you know, I just absolutely, I think it's amazing. And so I'm going to leave that there. And now, do you have a question for me?
Well, I'd love to touch on a couple of things you said because
Yeah.
I just like it. Like, you know, it really rang. I used to when I transitioned, and this is as a fairly young man, to my belief of evolution slowly into what would be an atheist.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I grew up with priests in a Catholic school, and the way those priests acted and the people in the church acted where I went to school was a huge part of me saying, like, what the fuck is going on here? So that stood out to me a lot. I was like, confirmation happened at 14, and I told my parents, I don't really feel that this is the thing to become an adult in the Catholic Church. But I resonated what you shared. Like, it was literally the leaders of this situation that ended up kind of showing me a way to be like, I'm not sure about this. So that was really interesting. And I really loved how you shared, like, sometimes when we're in a spiritual moment, it's when we don't even know we're in it. I've been thinking a lot about purpose and meaning, because we can sometimes look at the years we spent in addiction and also put them right alongside either getting things done or not getting them done. But now, I've been thinking and hearing and reading a lot about purpose and meaning. And one can look at their life, and we have been literally in our purpose and creating our meaning the entire time. It is what we're doing that leads us to this moment, like that. It's not definable by I become a lawyer and I do this, but I am in the middle of doing this. And in a way, the spiritual practice is very much the same. And when you said that, I was like, that is exactly what is bringing me peace about where I am in my life. I came into recovery at 50. Um, and this is our purpose, like literally what we're doing today. Much like this is a spiritual moment that doesn't have to be legs crossed and eyes closed.
Yeah.
We get to be in that moment, and to be in what is God is everything by just being here. So anyway, both those things really stood out during your share, which I appreciated, and I wanted to add to that.
I love that. And my friend Andrew, he was the one who's going to join us today, but yeah, I'm sure you're going to meet him sometime because I'm hoping you're going to come back. Andrew always said, this was the first day I met him. He was given a share and he said, the meaning of life is to give life meaning.
Yeah.
And, it's like that having that value and making those moments something.
Yeah, and how we define it, because even our religious expectations, when we talk about what God is, my hang up of what it was. I told my wife the other day that there was a Saturday share in the room who was speaking about God, how anyone would be like, this guy's totally religious. And at the end, he's like, I'm the least religious person in the world, but that's just the word I use to describe the universe because it's the word that works for me. And I was like, man, I'm still hung up. If I were to write in a post about just God saved my life, everyone I grew up with would be like, holy shit, Gab found religion. You know what I mean? And first of all, why that matters, it doesn't. The older I get, no one gives a fuck. But it's really interesting that we have these. Go ahead. You want to?
No, I'm going to let you finish, but I want to say something on that.
Yeah. And so we have these things that were so placed into our minds for so long through societal expectations, like even what is having purpose and meaning. Like for me now, I look at it, I am a rich man. I moved my family to Mexico. My goal can be to work this land I live in and this home that we have, and that is fine because some of us never followed. You look back and you've lived the life you were exactly supposed to live, and it led us right here. So anyway, go ahead, please.
Well, I just, I have a really hard time with the God word. Like, and because of my previous religious connotations. And then I've had this conversation with people a bunch of times. I'm like, okay, like, if we're saying it could be the God of our understanding or higher power, why do we need to use the G word? And they're like, well, it's convenient. I'm like, so is using the word goat. We don't say goat, or we don't say clouds, or we don't say universe. Like, but I find that it sets a certain number of people behind in their capacity to embrace the recovery program because they use that. Like
Right.
I do think that anybody who grew up with not a positive religious experience is set back by that word. And it
Yeah.
really is, like I'm like, if we just could not use that, it would make it easier for more newcomers. Like, and I know for me, I remember 8 years before I got clean and whatever, I went to like an AA meeting. I went to one, and it was not a good experience. It was everybody there was like super depressed. It was like a very strange group, and I was like, went home to my wife and I said, look, I said, first of all, I said, we've got the God issue. I said, we got the God issue. And I said, I said, I might be an alcoholic, but I said, I'm not a depressed alcoholic. I said, I refuse to take on another shitty trait, and then it was, that just was like what let me stay out for a while, kind of.
Yeah.
And it was my own perception.
It's pretty fascinating too, because as we get further in our spiritual studies, I guess, you start reading. And I'm a baby in this world, so I'm not dropping names like if I know shit, but reading, like Alan Watts and these guys who are super spiritually like whatever. I don't even know how to, I'm not smart enough to describe it right, but the word God means everything. And my wife can speak in those terms really well without thinking twice about it. She doesn't see God as the way I've been, like I hold on to it. And I'm not holding on aggressively, but it's, I got to have one finger on it still, And
I use the U word all the time, honestly. Like, I can do it and not cringe. I could do it anywhere and not feel like I'm lying.
Right. Like to what? Universe?
Yeah. Like, I can put universe wherever you put God.
Absolutely. No, I'm with you. But I'll end on this. There's something cool about the vision of God being everything, and I'm a D&D guy, so I'm kind of like a total nerd. So the idea of the pantheon in a way of all things, like, if I can throw a couple dragons in there too, we're fucking awesome. All right.
But like I figure somewhere in this universe there is dragons.
Yep, sure.
Yeah.
Right. I saw a few on acid once. They weren't real.
They weren't real. Okay. No.
All right.
Okay. So you got a question for me?
I do. I've so much pressure. Your question was so awesome. All right, but I do have a couple things here. In talking about a new life that we are sitting in and experiencing, and you are at 18 months of your new life?
Yeah, it was 18 on the 1st of April. Yep.
That is great. I know you just, congratulations. I sat in the deepest moments and tried to envision for 10 years. I said, like I tried to imagine what this could possibly be. Were you one to think about what was after this, and what was that like for you at the worst of times? And how does it compare in regards to those thoughts? And it's like a various part question, if I may just add this, because I have a couple different things here. Along with those darkest moments, we've done some fucked up things, I would imagine. We just seem like those kind of guys. Also coming out of that, how in the early days of your recovery did you process some of that stuff that we carry with us that is impossible to not know we did in the darker time? So anyway, a little bit of that.
Okay. So now when you're saying what I thought it would be like after this, you meant like after my addiction, right?
Yes.
Just to clarify. Yeah. And that's what I thought you meant. I wanted to make sure I was starting from the right point. Okay. So I grew up in Southern Ontario in Canada, outside of Toronto. It was a factory town. It was a really rough place. It was like everybody drank, and those and then there was the drinking and drugs. But I did not know a sober adult until my late 30s. So like somebody who was sober to me was somebody who drank less than 6. Like it really was it was like I had no shining example of like life in sobriety. In fact, I was never in a room of straight people until I entered the program. If you can imagine that, at the age of 51, or I guess no, that 8 years before I went to that one meeting, that was the only time. So I had no idea that you could be straight and that you could be happy. There was no, I had never seen an example of straight and happy until I ended up going into treatment. And so for the last, my sponsor breaks it down to 5 zones, right? There's the all good zone, right? You get the all good zone. You got the all good with a couple hiccups. You got the mostly hiccups with a little bit of good. You got the all hiccups, and then you got the desperation, right? And so I in my addiction, which was a 37-year span, the first 20 years, I was like, all good. Even if there was hiccups, dude, I didn't even acknowledge them. Like, I was like, everybody pisses in the closet once in a while. Like, like just something stupid and ridiculous. But for that last 17 years, there was a couple serious events that made other people angry or hurt in my life, that I'm not proud of. I'm not giggling about that. I was giggling about the not acknowledging anything was wrong before that. But in that period, that was where I would say that 17 years was my fight with step one. Because it was like, I thought, I I never understood about surrender, right? And so my fight was within the control of it. And so, I could say while my daughter was in school, I only got fucked up on weekends. I would only drink beer after a while, after a few bad, like hard liquor events. I would, I even took 20 months off one time. And that 20 months was filled with resentment for my family that I was doing it for. Like when they talk about white knuckling, or dry drunk, it's like, it's a real thing, man. Without the program to sort out your shit, you're just like straight and in your shit, and you got nothing to pacify you with, and it really
Yeah.
wasn't a good place. So September 30th of 2023, pretty much I ended up in the hospital, heart stopping, like getting brought back to life. And after that, it was pretty much like, my sober date, September 1st. And I knew that I wanted to change. I remember my wife coming to pick me up. She had to get flown into where I was. I was at this conference. She was not happy. She was not happy about that. Like that was not a fun 5-hour drive home. And so I took about 13 days to organize my shit, and then I went into a treatment center. And I remember the 13 days that I was anticipating going into the treatment center, I was like, okay, like I'm gonna go in there, and they're gonna teach me how to enjoy myself at a party. Like the party was such a part of my life that I had no clue, like no clue about the program. And I've always kind of been the person where I'm like, okay, I'm into learning something, and I don't need to research it beforehand sometimes. Like I'm just like, okay, like I got really scared. Like I don't know if you've almost died or had a near death experience, but when my heart stopped and I was going, there was no light. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. There was no like, hey, here's a harp, join God's band, the keys in G, like welcome Milan. It was like cold. It was dark. It was fucking lonely, and it was scary as fuck.
Yeah.
Like I do not want to go back there, at least not right yet anyway. And like, and so it was like fear was my motivator coming into the program. And that's okay. Like, I'm afraid of, like, I'm good with a chainsaw, but I'm also afraid of a chainsaw blade. There's
Yeah.
certain things, like there's just certain things that I don't need to I don't need to keep hurting myself with, or to that extent, you know? And so coming into the program, it was like, boom, surrender stopped the hamster wheel in my brain. And it was like, it was literally like a miracle right at that point, dude, where I was like, I'm I'm not thinking about getting more. I'm not thinking about using. I'm not thinking about using while using. I'm not thinking about tomorrow's using. And I'm not like making sure that there's enough for tomorrow. And all these hamster things that occupied like 30 to 70% of my brain, they were gone. They were gone. And I was like, holy shit. And so then I was like, okay, what's next? Like, what's next? What do you program guys got next? Because this is amazing. You know, like that was such a moment of freedom. And then, you know, I was lucky enough that the other people that were there were 7 people that were at the treatment center when I arrived, and they had been there 4 to 6 weeks. So they were ahead on their steps, and they're like, you know, the afternoon was step work time, and they're working hard, and they were like really diligent. They were really happy. They were laughing. It was like good times. And I was like, holy shit, man. I'm like 4 to 6 weeks. And like these guys were telling stories of how they came in there, like rolling hard off of like really hard drugs and just like horrific situations. And they're like smiling, looking normal, getting new teeth, you know, like, but I was like, wow, man. And so it gave me like a really solid thing of hope. And then when I did my step 4 and then did my step 5 with one of the support workers there, I had the first guilt-free 36 hours of my life. Dude, I never realized how much guilt I was carrying from that Catholicism and my life, like all the way up. And that, like, I was literally crying with joy for 36 hours at how that was gone. So, like, you know, for me, it's kind of been a real series of super profound things where it's like the more I put in, the more I get out, you know? Like I don't
Yeah.
feel like I'm getting complacent. I'm getting like more willingness all the time to get more wholehearted about this. And then doing something like this podcast, I get to talk to awesome people all the time.
Yeah.
And what do I talk about? I talk about recovery, and then I learn shit from people I love all the time, which is just a magical thing for me.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
That we're not here to answer
Yeah.
questions, Milan. We are just here on a verbal and spiritual journey to talk about recovery.
Yes.
That's what a buddy
Yes.
told me recently. So
Yeah. You know what? I
no
like that
question
guy.
answering.
I
Yeah,
like that
man.
guy.
You know, I have to say that you know, I'm really stoked to be sober, and I one of my favorite things is I wanted to for 35 years to sit around and contemplate in awe, and I didn't. I was just getting high and doing all sorts of things. I do a lot of that now, and I'm in awe of every moment from when I walked into that room, and really way before. But there's there's gates you go through. And I'm in awe of your excitement about your recovery. I really dig it. And I think that's one of the most awesome things about being able to share this journey, not only with someone like yourself, but with everyone in the room, is there are a variety of shades of, we're not going to say shades of gray, they're shades of pink and reds and everything, because everyone's journey is different, you know? And I believe that once upon a time, I would have been like, oh man, am I enough in recovery to be talking to this guy? Look at how excited he is. And you know, I am. We're
Oh,
going to
you
be on
are.
different we're going to be on different roads, and I'm glad to be on this road with you. Um, and I love so many of the things that you said. Um, you know, you it's pretty amazing. I think if we would it's no different than meeting someone when we were still on the road, you know what I mean? You connect in seconds and you're like, oh, me and this dude are gonna go shoot
Yeah.
up in like 10 minutes. But it's the same when we sat next to each other in the room, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this fella and I have walked the same path. Like I could feel it. Like I could
Mm.
literally, I don't know if you did, but I felt that
Oh, I
energy
knew.
going,
I knew.
oh
That's why I
man,
was like,
this
dude, I'm like, I'm leaving. I need your number.
Yeah, no, this guy and I have done similar things, and so a lot of the things you said really resonated with me, and our journeys have been similar. A big part for me in those 10 years of knowing that there was a better way, but things were, things were really awesome for a long time. And I have a short version someone said to me that I loved, things are great. Things are great with problems, and then it's just things are problems, And so, like there was way less nuance in
Yeah.
mine. It just took a really long time in each section. And for years, I would say, man, I'm a pro at this. And everyone I knew would say I was a pro at it. My wife would say I was a pro at it.
Oh yeah,
Functional
people.
weekend. Yeah, like functional
No,
weekend
people said I was
warriors.
like, they're like, you're professional. I was like,
Absolutely, like I could, go hard all weekend, right in the arm, and then go to work all week in like a suit. My wife and I were in entertainment industry, and I'm not celebrating it, but even as soon as I started just having that thought, you know, um, I had the counter thought for many years too, which is like what do I become? Even if I get this thing I want, which I don't know how to get, and it was never around going to AA. I didn't even really, the word AA didn't enter my mind until really close to before I reached out to somebody in the program. It was just stopping somehow. And it was then immediately like, but the party is who I am. Like the party is who I am. And that went for a really, really long time as a co-partner to the conversation in my own mind about sobriety, because even when things there were rough, there was always stuff that happened. That's the thing, there's always stuff that happens, but
life happens.
it passes, and then you go and you get high again, and then it's all forgotten. I would call it like surviving was a celebration of its own, like getting through that night. Like for years I was like, I'm no different than a mountain climber. Like when I stay up for 4 nights straight, like I'm the last man standing, that is like someone who climbed a mountain. It's like superhuman. I used to brag about it, like, you know what I mean? Like this is not a joke, and I really thought myself like an advanced human, like really for a long fucking time. It's pretty funny.
Dude,
Um,
I felt the exact same way, man. Exact same. I was like, sleep's for when you die. Sleep's for
oh,
pussies.
for sure. And then you and I talked about sleep in the room, and we were pretty stoked that we like sleeping
Oh,
now.
I love it, man.
But I'm thinking of my own question, and um, what's cool is I didn't know what it was that I wanted. Well, what I ended up getting is way better than what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
First of all, because it wasn't fucking easy. It's not easy. Um, and I have another question, which we'll talk about the ease of it. Um, and but it's also just not so cut and dry as like I stopped and I don't do this thing, because how could anything that one studied at for so long, be turned off like that? So, for me, it's very surprising how amazing it's been. And I didn't know what I wanted it to be. I just know when it got to a point, I wanted it more because I knew I was going to fuck up my relationship with my wife. And, some of the shame and the things that, I've done a million funny things, I could tell you, I actually wrote down a couple, like, cause there's funny stories too, man. There's great ones, you piss in the
It's
closet.
not all
I have
regrets. It's
a
not all
great,
regrets to me at
oh
all. Like,
no. And there's not many regrets. That so funny, the regrets are so quiet, you know, being around my small kids, and they had no idea, but me knowing that I am not paying a fucking lick of true attention. They're there and everyone's safe and there's none of that, but my mind is on other things. That is the kind of stuff that I know that I have an opportunity, like, because I held guilt. You spoke about guilt. The guilt was strong early on, and I just know that now we move forward, and now is my You know, getting sober was the first bit of that amend, you know, and speaking about it, you know, I had an opportunity to share my first year, take my son to an open meeting, a buddy's 7-year chip. And it was really important. And he's been part of that journey and he talks about it all the time now that he's older. So anyway, you know, I love talking about how people have processed some of those thoughts because I can still cringe at some shit, you know, I can think about it, you know, and you're like, oh fuck, you know, and but it's also the tapestry that allowed us to be this. What's beautiful is, and it's just because, you know, I was really worried, what would I become? Like I could have become, I couldn't become anything but what I became. And what I became is what I am. Nothing changed. But, you know, I was able to keep going and be around people partying. I realized I never liked being around drunks, even when I was a drunk. You
Yeah.
know, I never liked. I was the guy on speed who was quiet and drawing while someone repeated their fucking story to me, and I wanted to kill them. And so the reality is, none of it changed. I still didn't want to be around those folks. I don't want to be, but I can go to a bar and be with friends. I can, you know, none of that becomes a hang up. I'm very grateful that that I didn't become someone judgmental and allowed others to continue their journey. And hopefully, just by being public, I mean, in Sayulita, we don't really hide our sobriety and our recovery. It's really hard to do it. Much like I wanted what so many people in the room have, you know, we can only be trying to be a good person around others and hope they reach out if they need it.
Absolutely. I like that, and that's extremely well said. You know, I was had a meeting just 2 Fridays ago, and there's the open mic night at the local brewery, and I had it arranged with my friend who owns the pub, that I could come in right after the meeting and play my songs and split because I had to work the next morning, and I was going to the meeting before. And so, end of the meeting, I'm like, "Hey, anybody want to come to the pub for a few songs while I play?" And I was like, "I'm the only guy announcing that in the AA meeting," and I thought that was pretty funny. But you know,
Well,
most of them looked at me like, "What?"
well, you know, that show I told you about, you were there
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
during that period of time. You know, it felt like it would have been very natural. And I did personal little invites to folks. Um, but I also was very conscious and respectful. I don't know people's pulls or triggers or any of those things. You know, I'm, you know, grateful to the universe that I don't want to drink alcohol. You know, and um, when I see someone having a glass of whiskey, that was my cup of tea, wild turkey, you know. It, the second from thinking about the burn is followed so quickly by that it would be impossible for me not to immediately pour 3, 4, 5 cups in a row afterwards. So, you know what I mean? I know that it is, it's never one drink for me, and I know this, and those triggers aren't there. So
I'm
it's great.
lucky enough to be able to go out too now, and you know, for me though, it really like partying isn't a spectator sport. It like it, I don't. I'm not. Man, I know that I was not ready for a long time on my journey, and I don't expect anybody else to be where I'm at or anything. But watching people get really drunk is kind of boring to me. Like I would rather do a podcast like this. I'd rather go to a meeting. I'd rather record a song. You know, like I would rather do the things that I'm really passionate about doing than necessarily just be immersed in people getting wasted. It's just not. It like it was losing its fun for me when I was still doing it, let alone like when I'm not doing it. You know, like I just feel like
Yeah,
my life's at a different place right now. Okie dokie.
absolutely.
I'm gonna ask you another question.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We continue to discover new ways to live, new freedom, and new paths to explore. We travel together as one in fellowship, and we pave the road as we walk it for all who may follow. How do you strive to pave the way for the newcomer in your recovery?
Well, getting the opportunity to be a newcomer in the big picture 3 times, uh, and collecting coins multiple times. I am very honest and shame-free about that. And I want to be able to make sure that a newcomer knows and feels comfortable with imperfection. I there's a lot of people in the rooms, and this isn't shit talking, but paint a perfect picture of their lives, and life isn't perfect or easy at any point in our lives or recovery. I think that just making sure that talking about rough days and days that we're struggling and also days that are great has always helped me. I've had no better meeting than when someone is talking about how hard it is, but they're always going to continue striving forward, and that this isn't perfect because we're sober. Life isn't it's not cured, it's not
Yeah.
done, and I learned a lot of that from others. And I think just being my truest sense. And I think in my early days I obsessed on what I would share the whole day before going to a fucking meeting, and it felt curated.
Yeah.
And it only was in the last year and a half that I realized that my, like, just talk and stumble and just speak your truth and your heart. And that is the most response I'm going to get from someone who actually heard what I had to say and appreciated the rawness of what we're going through. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, you know, 35 years of hard active addiction. And then really, I mean, this sobriety bit has been just a notch on that fucking big old oak tree. Like, this isn't easy. Some of us are blessed that we have that you feel like you do. I've seen the 25-year sober person who is miserable. I've
I
seen
didn't
those
get straight
people,
to be miserable.
And I was affected by people who are sober a long time and not happy, and that happens too. And so anyway, I just all I can do is be honest. Last night I secretated a meeting and read a 1979 Grapevine article on honesty, and it was really great. And I know all I can be honest, and both in the room, in my life, and around a newcomer, is just tell my experience. That was the biggest thing I learned. It's just all I can do is just say, in my experience, this is how it works. In my experience now, which wasn't my experience the whole time I've been in the room, it's total abstinence, but it wasn't before. I had a sponsee before I relapsed who didn't want total abstinence. Well, I need to be like my first sponsor and accept someone who is potentially California sober. I believe that abstinence is the way I am, and those are the things I need to share, and that's just part of the deal. So, yeah,
Nice.
just be
I
as
love that.
honest as I can be.
And how do I strive to pave the way for the newcomer in my recovery? Well, I remember I walked in, well, it wasn't my first meeting, but when I walked into the treatment center, and I was scared, dude. I had no clue. I thought it was like going to jail. Like, honestly, I just didn't know. And it was just a bunch of people like me. You know what I mean? But I walked in, and my friend, I call him Young Gabriel. He's about a year younger than me. But, I'm the only guy calling him young, and he loves it. But anyway, young Gabriel turned to me because he was got to the treatment center 6 weeks before me, and he said, "You're in the right place." And I was like, I swear to God, it just disarmed me, and I was like, "Oh, I'm in the right place," and I instantly felt so comfortable. And it's like I say those words to people all the time now. When I see them, I'm like, "Hey, man, you're in the right place." or the woman or whatever. Like, I'm just like, they meant that, like, you're in the right place. 5 words. 5 words changed my recovery experience to like questioning what the fuck I was doing with my life to being in the right place. And it's amazing
Yeah.
the power of reassurance in that way, like, because it is kind of scary coming into the unknown. And a lot of people, probably like me, their minds are running a million miles an hour, and coming off of drugs, man, your mind is like, there's a lot of huge in those early days, like I remember them like, read this. And I was like, man, I can't even barely read a sentence right now. Like my brain was so
Yeah.
frazzled for the first bit. And so, like I have a couple sponsees that I work with, um, I try to create a sphere of love and acceptance. So when people walk in, that they're going to feel loved, and I want that, like I want that positive feeling for them to come into, because like I said, I didn't have a positive representation of sobriety. I would love, like,
Yeah.
I want to show that you can be happy in recovery because I am happy in recovery. Like, I'm not going to
Yeah.
fake, like, I'm not going to, oh, yeah, recovery's all right. It's all right. It's not all right. I fucking love it. It's way fucking better. Like, it's way better. And what's going on with myself and my family and my own evolution, it's something that I could never have hoped for. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm musically writing, like, record-setting number of songs for myself, and I love that. And it's not everybody's. That's like, whatever your goal is, you're gonna have more brain power for it when you're sobriety. And a big part of starting this podcast, like, that's why it's called Freedom Rising, because I wanted to show people the freedom rising in our hearts. Like, and that's why I wanted to have you on today. I don't pick people like 25-year John, and then he comes on and is like, traffic sucked and I hate this. And like, I don't care. I don't want that. I want people to see that there can be a spark, there can be fun, and you don't have to stop all of the fun stuff in your life to be part of recovery. And I think that I want to share that with the newcomer. And so, like, my goal is to get this up to 100 episodes so that if somebody's coming in hard, they could lie at home for a month and watch this podcast
Yeah.
like they binge watch Netflix,
Yeah.
and actually
Absolutely.
learn about some of the topics or what it's
Yeah.
like, coming in. And I think that's my answer on that one. You got another question for me,
Absolutely.
brother?
I do. I do. And it speaks to some of the stuff. Um, you know, so being sober is awesome. It just is not comparable to anything I lived in the past. And I live in a point of gratefulness, and your excitement and how you share. It's obvious that you feel that energy, and it is freedom rising. Um, as I think of my place as a newcomer and newcomers listening, and you were speaking about newcomers, it is most possible that people have rough days. Um, that there are triggers that lead us back to thoughts of our previous life. And so, my question to you, or for us to discuss, is what have been, especially in the early days, the biggest triggers in your recovery, things that still muddy the path, and what are some of the tools that you use, not even on a day by day, but on a moment by moment? Because we can be I'll speak of myself, I can be in this bliss. I am a representative of this program and its success. And I'm thrilled to be here. And I have some bad fucking days sometimes. And I don't want to drink. But that doesn't mean that there's not triggers for me related to what I was in before. And I'm curious if that
Mm,
happens to you. I don't even know if I placed that question right, but the word triggers and how we deal
yeah,
with them is really,
yeah. And when I white knuckled it before in the past, like, man, I could make myself not use or drink, and I would be sitting there and I would be watching you and I would be like fixated on it, and all I would be thinking, you'd be saying a sentence like that, and I'd have to ask you what your sentence was in the first third, the second third, and at the end, because all I would be thinking about was what I wanted with that substance. And, so in some ways, okay, I'm a bad person to ask this question to, for one reason is that with my surrender, dude, I have not had the compulsion to use or drink. Like, and I can say that like for real, and it's unbelievable to me. Like, it's absolutely unbelievable. It's a freaking miracle inside this program. So I have not had the compulsion to use, but I would like to address how I manage my bad days, because it's just like I feel like when I came in, I was wholeheartedly ready to let shit go. And then as soon as I turned that fight of the substance over to the universe and that fight stopped being mine, it really stopped being mine. So,
yeah.
like anybody out there, man, it is possible for you to forget about the desire to use. But as far as it goes, what one of the things I learned inside the treatment center was what they call like prelapsing, which I do believe that your question is kind of like part of, and that relates to emotional sobriety. And it says in the big book, I love this quote, and the only reason I know this quote is because they used to make us do this reading every morning in the treatment center. But, what we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition, right? Like, so some people say, oh, I stay in the middle of the road because I don't want to fall off the edge. Well, for me, sleep. If I have not slept enough, I can be a jerk. Like I know I can be a jerk. And the day turns from the opportunity to find a solution to nothing but problems. Like it's like that fast of a switch. And so, I go to my in-person meeting on Monday nights. It's in a town, it's a far drive away. And I'm always tired Tuesday. Well, I've just stopped booking anything for Tuesday morning. Like I know. Also, diet, like if I'm eating shitty food, I feel like shit. And if I'm eating good food, I feel better, and I would say that, snacking has been an issue in sobriety for sure,
Yeah.
and still an ongoing thing, but much less than it was early on. Like early on, I think I replaced drugs and alcohol with sugar, to a certain extent, and that's gone down considerably. But and then exercise. Like
Yeah.
if my blood's not flowing, my energy's not flowing, my day is not flowing, and so I've got two wonderful dogs I love tons, and I do about 8 to 10K a day with them. I mean, that's how I start my day. Like I start my day, you know, with I start my day with my program. I get up, I do my gratitude list, I do my readings, I come downstairs, I either mix a song or write a song or two, and then I go walk my dogs. I come back, I might exercise or do a meeting right then, and then that generally will give me a reasonable day. And I rinse and repeat. And people are like, "Oh, like, don't you get bored with a routine like that?" And I'm like, "Okay, I got 1,100 fucking songs last year. Do you know how much variety that is? Do you know how much variety that is? It's like I don't even know which names and go with which music on the songs unless I open it up and listen to it. Like, but the thing is, like life is as wonderful and awe-inspiring as you give it. Like my first sponsor said that gratitude is an action. He said, you love your dogs, well then walk them and feed them right. He's like, you love that sunny day, go let the sun hit your face. you know, um, and I believe in that. I really believe that it's like I can. I've had days in the last year where even weeks actually where I even said, I said if I had to Groundhog Day this week for the rest of existence forever for the rest of the universe, I could handle this week. And I've never in my life ever said right now is good. Like, I wrote a song about it. It was like, when is good enough? When can we call it love? You know? And really for me, you know, um, I'm getting to the point where some things are just they're good enough for my heart to be like, yay.
Awesome, man.
Hmm.
Love it. Well, I'm incredibly inspired, and as we're fond of saying, I want some of what you have. Um, I talk about triggers, and our questions are sometimes born out of the necessity of to want to hear someone else answer them. Um, my the awesome part of my journey from beginning to now is that I got stopped drinking alcohol, and then weed rose up and became the big guy. um, that got put away. There was always other things, but they never became. It was always funny enough managing, even if I describe those stories, it seems intense. They always kind of never took a forefront. Then when I stopped doing that, I had that knee surgery because I stopped smoking weed, and I then began running a 10K every morning obsessively and shift my schedule, started going to bed earlier, trying to sleep, and ruined my knees within 3 months and had to have surgery. So obsessive behavior. And from there transitioned into something that was always there, but I was able to run it off by running a 10K every day, which was an eating addiction. And so the big lesson for me has been that balance is the goal. Um, and the triggers come, and there's still a want, and there's still um it's still there. And I talk about this for anyone else who listens who, I used to say, hey man, it's just food and running. I don't want to use. But for me, I feel like that's really, I want to find balance in all of it. And so the triggers are of want. They are of want of things.
Hmm.
Um, and so I don't have an answer to that. I know that much like with drugs and alcohol, that balance is the answer. And I hear your surrender and emotional sobriety, and it's interesting because I have a lot of those things, but I still find these moments, and they're just there, and I
Hmm.
don't have an answer really. I just like talking about these things
Yeah, well, that's why we're
because
here.
it has really left the realm of wanting to drink and do drugs. Um, but there's these other things. I got really comfortable with not running anymore, which I was obsessed with running for 20 years. And now that I can start actually moving my knee more and going to this functional training, I feel like I want to make sure I go every day, or what,
Yeah.
And I feel that kind of want. Like if I'm going to miss a morning, like what's going to happen? And that is the addict brain right there. That is the addict
Hmm.
brain. Um, so I do go places. I pray on things.
Hmm.
I meditate. Um, and, I really focus on making sure that I love myself and accept myself, whether I worked out that morning or not. So, emotional sobriety is huge, and, it's constant work. For anyone else listening, you're not alone if it goes beyond into other realms. I've been considered an obsessive collector before, so it could go in any direction. I'm trying to find balance. So anyway,
I,
there you
I
go.
I would like to say too that, like last year I went ballistic. It was 1138 songs I wrote last year and recorded. And it was insane, and I realized that it was out of balance. Like now I do maybe a song or two a day, which still is a lot, but it's not where I was. And I realized that, that action was an addictive behavior. Even if I was addicted to sound, I really was addicted to it. But also, I was doing it enough that it was not giving me enough time for exercise, B, not giving me enough time for the family, and C, it was it was like hurting my body. Like I was doing it enough
Yeah.
that like an 11 song day, and I could barely walk up to bed after after just moving and strumming and and so I've realized, like, I agree with you. It is about the balance. It is about the balance, but not like, like just because that turned into that, it's a little bit different than alcohol or drugs. Like for me, there is no balanced usage of substances like that. Like I spent 17 years proving to myself that that doesn't happen. But with songs, I can take it down to one song a day. And even on some days where I have a morning podcast, have no songs, and I'm not like grumpy about it. I'm not missing it,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
I
Yeah.
do like it to be part of my day, partly though, because music is my meditation. And when I have my meditation early in the day, I'm going to be a nicer guy for the rest of the day. Like
Yeah.
I've looked at that in retrospect, in hindsight, in that way, and happened to find that. So, I've got another question for you, if you're up for it.
All right. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Within our recovery, we have the freedom to try new things and take new risks. What new things have you discovered inside recovery, or what old things you loved that fell by the wayside are back?
Well, some of them seem a little on the nose, but prayer is something I never would have thought that I would be doing on a daily basis. You know, and my journey back as my prayer being a part of my life growing up, when I was younger, and I'm talking like 7, 8, kneeling by bed at those ages, just what we did, you know, and saying whatever prayers we were told to. And I went to Catholic school. I lost all of that from 20 on into really coming into the room, which is at 50. And, I touched on, during COVID, my father passed away, but my mom's Alzheimer's was so bad that and she lived in California then. I had to go put the hazmat suit on. Um, and that morning in the hotel room, I dropped to my knees for the first time ever and prayed for help. That this go. I was nervous as fuck. Blah blah blah. My mom, who had pretty advanced Alzheimer's at that point, could only see this much of my eyes. I walked in and she said, "Oh, Gabby, you're here." First of all, big deal. And I was like, "Hi, Mom." And she's like, "Did something happen to Dad?" And I was like, "Yeah, Dad passed away." The whole time I'm there, she totally understood everything. The next thing, she didn't even know that I'd been there. So never again remember Dad was dead. And that's a whole nother story. But that was just the beginning of like, what the fuck? I dropped to my knees and this works, and like, what in the what? Really trippy shit. And then it wasn't until I got clean that I always felt running was my meditation. In fact, that was my tagline. I run 2.5 hours a day. I'm in a Zen mode. That's my meditation. I could never sit still, and some days I can't. Um, but meditation entered my life through a variety of really cool things. A gentleman who was in the AA room, I dreamt about him. He was an AA teacher, a meditation teacher. I wrote him, I dreamt about you, almost a complete stranger. That morning we meditated on Zoom with my wife and him, and it started this journey that has had all sorts of variations to it, high expectations down to the best lessons being that there's no expectation and just returning to a basic breath and thought is all I need to do. And so I don't put any pressure on myself. And that's all part of it. That's all part of my recovery is patience and confidence and being cool with what's happening. So those are two humongous ones. I think those are big ones. I'm grateful that um, my life changed dramatically and didn't as well. I never had to stop doing things I did before or lose things that I did. I didn't, I paint a lot less at 4 a.m. than I used to, but that's a whole nother story.
Okay, so now I'll answer this question here. What new things have I discovered inside recovery, and what old things that I loved that fell by the wayside are back? Well, I never fully stopped music, but it definitely, like, drugs were used as a creative tool initially, but they actually ended up stunting my creativity. Like kind of very much like when you said you had, kind of like that conscious separation when you had that night of the relapse and the next day, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a and kind of it really kind of actually I had a bit of an epiphany about that today when you were talking. I was like, oh my God. I'm like, that's why I stopped being creative at certain points with the drugs. Like it was almost like my
Yeah.
disconnection from the universe.
Yeah.
So I've had a huge connection, and a lot of my music now is about recovery, like a lot of it, and it's mostly me taking, step work I'm doing, work with sponsee, shares I've heard, things that I'm really mulling over in my brain, and it's trying to take it and pull it apart and look at it, because when I put it into a song, I'm like, huh, I sound pretty stupid there. Or I'm like, whoa, I didn't even see that side of it. You
Yeah.
know, like and that's what kind of one of the beauties of actually having it recorded and being able to listen back is that you actually hear what you're saying. Sometimes, you're skipping from word to word to word, that you don't hear your whole message as a whole from outside and what it
Yeah.
actually sounds like. And, I would have to say that meditation and prayer have been something that I've implemented that I never had. I I still do think that my purest form of meditation is music, because it's one of the only moments that I really have a Zen moment where I'm actually just doing everything I can to create that music, and there is no anything else going on, like it is my one moment of true actuation, and I could understand like how, when you were talking about that with running, like it's
Yeah.
exactly like that. There's just certain things where, like, when it takes everything you got and you're just doing it, like there's no extra. There's no
Yeah.
extra, and those are the such beautiful moments, and I've had so many of those moments in my sobriety that, for me, there's just like no turning back. Like
Yeah.
one of my good friends, Scotty, who comes on and does the podcast with me, he's got 15 or 16 years now. And he said, man, he's like, doing the steps ruined using for me. Like, he's just like, I can't even consider it the same thing. Like, he had one relapse and he was just like, man, he's like, this just isn't the same kind of fun anymore, you
Yeah.
know, especially when
Yeah.
you've had a deeper fun. And then, one thing that has occurred to me was starting a podcast. I got interviewed for someone else's podcast, and I'm like, I love this. I
Yeah.
love talking about cool questions with people I love that are inspiring, and kind of like, I almost see this program as like when you go to a meeting and you hear someone share and you're like, oh man, I just wished, like I got like some questions on that share or something. It's like this is our chance to do that, where it's like, oh, I heard Gabby share. Now I'm getting a little bit of extra Gabby on the side, and what's going on in your mind, and then you're getting, like, and I find that the way that everybody answers the questions on this, like that everybody gets a chance to respond on each question, it really opens it up. Like where man, I get really inspired by what other people say, and then it's like by the time, if I'm the last one answering the question, sometimes like when there's four people on this, I'm like, holy God, I got a lot of inspiration.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
totally.
and I find that to be a real magical thing. Okay, so do you got another question for me, brother?
Yeah, and I'll speak a little like, the the recovery podcast like world is pretty awesome. Like there's a I love to hear horror stories. I got to tell you, maybe it comes from my horror movie background. I love watching movies about junkies, like at the worst of their life. I love that always. And so, like I can listen to like a podcast like Dopey, where they're just telling their horror stories, but it always wraps up with the way we came into our recovery. And then there's just so many variations. So I think it's awesome that that's something that that came into your world through your recovery. Um, and you also mentioned something that's so important, and I talk about with a lot of other artists and musicians, which is like when we use drugs and alcohol as that inspiration to do things. I had a long stretch of creating things that was under the influence,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I battled with, did they matter on the landscape of my artistic creation? And they did. I'm going to say they
Okay.
did.
Oh,
You,
yeah.
you,
No,
you,
like there was the
you
all
know,
goods phase.
but yeah, right. Well, and even in the all bad, they were a depiction of my demise. But
Hmm.
anyway, I'm not here to defend or to hold up, but it's one of those things that I do look at as part of this fucking journey. Where does inspiration come from, and how many of us seek it. Someone made a joke in writing recently that, every good writer is a fucking alcoholic and a drug addict. And all of these things and these variations, I've often said as soon as someone gets old and sobers up, their music sucks. And I'm just saying that about some of my favorite artists. It's totally not true. And don't take it in reference to your music. But it's just, you know what I mean? It's one of those
Yeah.
fucking trippy things when we talk about inspiration. Where does it come from? So anyway, um, let's see what this question will be. Well, some of them don't apply because you live in a world of bliss. So, let's see.
No, it's not all bliss.
um, all right. Here's one that's pretty good. I think. As we get in recovery, we learn about the promises. We sit in this point that we're at right now, celebrating what is really early days in this
Hmm?
journey for guys like you and I. What are some of the things that you look forward to being a relative baby in sobriety, if you don't mind
Hmm.
me saying? I know
Yep.
I am.
Yep.
A baby at the age of a grown man. It's a
Hmm.
fascinating dichotomy, right? We're both in
Hmm.
our 50s, yet we're just like kids, literally just got let into this candy store. And I know that there's so much more.
Hmm.
I don't know if I have an answer for this question, but what are some of the things you're looking forward to in your recovery? And what are and this is a two-parter, but the first part is kind of hard to answer. What's the biggest thing that you're learning about yourself in these last 18 months of your recovery? So, what are you looking
Okay.
forward to, and what are some of the things you're learning about yourself?
Okay, I'm going to start with the second part first because I feel
Yes.
like as soon as you said that, I'm like, well, like right now, okay, this tattoo on my arm here is acceptance. What I've been learning about is that I didn't really accept the world as it was, very much so at all. And, doing my second set of steps last summer with my sponsor, he was like, I thought I had my part and fears all sorted out. And he's like, that's acceptance. Ooh, that's acceptance. Ooh, that's acceptance. Acceptance, accept. And so I left that session with him, got into my car, and it was a long session. We were together a few hours, and I'm like, my head's all swimming. Acceptance, 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 acceptance. And the phone rings, and my daughter's like, yeah, when you thought you had a daughter who didn't have cancer, it turns out actually I got cancer. The test came back positive. And it was like, boom, acceptance, like to the millionth fucking degree, dude. And right there in my brain, I'm like, this isn't about you. Don't make this about you. And like, like right now, she needs someone to be strong. Like, I have to exhibit acceptance right now. And so much so that a week later, I went and got this tattoo just so I'd see it every time I fucking hold my arm up on the guitar. And it's I didn't put that there for other people to learn about acceptance. I put it there as my reminder. And I feel that it's given me a purpose in life. Like, my purpose in life is to learn acceptance now. And about, gosh, I don't know, maybe about 3 weeks ago, it was Tom from the Grupo Pacifico was on, and right at the very end of his podcast with us, he said, this is a quote somebody said to me early on in my program, is, this is not a program of self-improvement. This is a program of surrender. And man, you start looking at that statement and thinking about your own recovery, like, man, that honestly, that quote changed my entire focus on my recovery. I looked at it and I was just like, and right after that, 2 days later, I don't know if you remember, there was a guy named Chris who came from Portland who was in the meeting when I was there.
Yeah.
And Chris, like, one of my friends, Brandy's like, her favorite saying is, how free do you want to be? And so, me or Andrew said, how free do you want to be, to Chris? And he's like, your level of freedom depends on your surrender, or your level of surrender. And it's just like, since then, every single thing has been like, surrender, 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 surrender. It's my, right now, I'm just swamped in surrender. And that the acceptance, it's going to come from my surrender. And then, last Wednesday, I had this thing that happened with me where I was driving along and I got a song that's got like the Serenity Prayer in it, right? And I've been looking at that prayer backwards the whole time. I was like, "Ooh, if I have acceptance, then I'm going to get serenity." And if I, and, and the courage and the wisdom and all this. But it's like, no, all these things are lying right inside me. And all I have to do is calm myself down to that serenity, and acceptance can come out of me, and compassion can come out of me, and tolerance can come out of me. And it's like, I was looking for all these external things. Like I needed to get something, but I just need to become something. And then they'll all be there. And so that is like my biggest thing right now, is that I'm just like, wow, like I'm first of all, I'm like, thank fucking God I had that thought. And I know that a lot of people probably never looked at the Serenity Prayer backwards like I did. And great on you for being smarter than me. But for me, it's just like, I think to those moments that I had serenity in my life. I was never angry. I was never without acceptance. I was never intolerant. So it's like it all starts with bringing myself to the present moment, because that presence is the only place that I'm going to start finding serenity. You know, like we don't have yesterday's serenity in a bank. There's no bank account for serenity. Right?
No,
So yeah, okay. So that was the second part of that question. I feel like I was a little bit long-winded, but
no,
but
not at all.
and then what was the first part again?
Just what it's they speak to each other. It's what are you looking forward to in your recovery? Being
Yeah.
someone who
So
those
I'm
of us who are
looking
newer.
forward to continuing this journey. Like I'm stoked about it. Like and in fact now I feel like I'm more excited about it than ever to continue. I wanna continue doing this podcast. I wanna, you know, like I kind of envision it building up to being like almost this family of like 20 or 30 people recovering who just kind of keep coming on, bringing different friends with them. Because I don't know if you watched any of the episodes, like where it's like
Hmm.
3 or 4 of us, but it's actually a really cool dynamic because of the way that we kind of circularly ask the questions. There's very little toe stepping on, and the energy flows, and it makes it really easy for people who don't know each other to actually share a whole lot,
Nice.
because by the time you go through a couple questions, you really learn something about that other person in the circle. And
Yeah.
so I'm really looking forward to like this kind of evolving into a like almost like a family format, like, you know, where it's, but there's always kind of new people coming on, obviously. I'm really looking forward to, you know, continuing to heal stuff with my family. Really, you know, like I had I had a good 90-10 rule in my addiction, dude. I was 90% of the time awesome. But man, in the 10% I sucked, I really fucking sucked. And you know, and there's just some things right now that I'd like to offer as a son, as a husband, as a dad, you know, that I never got to before. You know, and
Yeah.
even if it means being the strong one right now for people who need it in my family, then that's what I want to be. And you know, I want to keep songwriting. You know, like I really, I'm really getting into right now. I'm going back and revising stuff. I'm now officially 1 year no smoking, and
Oh,
so
yes.
and now my singing's getting better. Like on the 29th of March, that was my 1 year no smoking, and my singing's getting better. And I'm not like a singer like your wife. Okay, let's just say that she's a phenomenon. Like, you know, truly, like she's amazing. You know, but for myself, I'm way better than I was a year ago, and I love that. And so I'm revising a bunch of tracks that I wouldn't release before that I sang on, and then,
Nice.
you know, I want to start like my home group is the Monday Night Beginners. I want to start a beginners group down in my community, because having the name Beginners, it brings out people who are curious. And I
Yeah.
realized how important that is in that name. It's one of the busiest meetings I've ever been to in my life. Like there's like 70 to 80, 90 people who come to it every week. And it's because you look online and what do you see? You see, hey, there's a beginners meeting. Well, I'm a beginner in recovery. Let's go look. But,
Yeah.
you know, like that simple thing opened the door for me and other people. And then there's a jail near me, and I want to start doing a jail meeting. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah, that's the things
Nice.
I want to go towards.
Man, those are beautiful things, man. I love it. You got a nice full plate.
Yeah.
Again, I have to say is I find you very inspiring, and I'm really grateful to be able to share this time with you. And I'm feel honored to receive all this information of your journey. It's very awesome. It's very representative of the program to me. So thank you. Thanks for having me
Oh,
here.
I love you, dude. I'm grateful that you wanted to come. I was like, man, I want some of that light in you to be shining here, you know?
Thank you, brother. I'll answer my little
Mm,
question here. I'm sitting in a, I learned that I can be patient, and patience has created confidence. And that's almost like I say those words like it's rocket science to me, because it is. Like the fact that I find that by being calm and being in a patient place in my heart allows me to know everything's going to be okay, and then allows me to move forward through the day in such a way that changes everything, is rocket science. It feels like literally like the, question that answered the answer to every question.
Mm.
And so that's what I'm learning about myself. There's such simple, small things that allows me to feel almost childlike in regards to these learnings, because I find myself talking about them. My wife is, I'm blessed to have a best friend and a wife, um, and I hear myself sometimes talking about these, I call it philosophies. Or not philosophies, there's little things like no one's ever thought of that before, but to me it's really new and it feels great. So that's just one of the biggest learnings right now for me is patience and sitting in that. Um, what I want is, I hear you talk about surrender, and I want the level of surrender that you have. Um, it's impossible to be where I am in my sobriety without have surrendered, but there's so
Mm.
much more. There's, I
It's the
mean,
endless quest, man.
it truly is endless. And acceptance is right there with it. I love that. I love your tattoo. I have one on my fist that says "Be a better man today," and it's a cheat sheet. And I got it long time ago when I needed to read that every fucking morning as an inspiring, and then cover it up sometimes and be like, "Don't read the hand." Um, Today I can surrender into being a better man every day and feel confident that I am being that. So I want to continue that journey of acceptance, and I love where I am, and I look forward to going further. Um, I I Some of my meaning and purpose is being on this earth and being in awe of it and being in awe of nature and being outside in it. I felt like I lost it when I couldn't run anymore, and it's just ridiculous. It's everywhere, and I feel like that is like a church for me, and I want to spend more time in that and realize that being is enough some days, being in a space of that awe and finding awe. Yeah, I just want to settle into all of that. It's almost actionless. You know what I want more of? I
It's
feel like I
peeling
spent
away. It's peeling
I
away stuff, not adding to it, right?
I feel like for years, everything was action oriented. There was an underlying false energy that was coming from this constant want and this fire burning to have the next thing, the constant craving. That felt like an action in itself, an exhausting action. And I look at that when I look back. I also don't regret, and I celebrate the journey. But again, truly to get to, I feel like, oh, I get to be, that Cheech and Chong, but just not high. But I'm high. I'm high on this, I'm not sounding kooky, but the reality is I can sit out and literally watch my fucking garden grow. No joke. Every fucking day. Like, how much has that plant grown? I'm blessed with the new home that we have with a very large area of jungle around me. And that's the awe that I was seeking when I was getting high. That's the awe that I was seeking when I was trying to find another mindset. Um, and the beauty is that I get it in my sobriety.
I love that.
That's it, man. I got what I was seeking today.
I love that. All right. And Gabby, I'm so grateful you came here today. Is there any
Thank
message
you.
you'd like to share with the people before we end?
A message for the people. Sure, I do. I didn't know if I would ever be able to get sober, honestly. And I was in the darkest of nights and I was doing fucked up shit and I was not being the right friend, husband, and parent. Um, but that didn't, but if you're ever feeling like that, man, there's an avenue. There's definitely an avenue. It's as simple as believing that you can do it. Reach out to somebody. So the first step is reach out and ask for help. And what my friend Milan just said, we got to just surrender, stop fighting. The fight is just going to keep you longer at bay. Um, and that is every level of it. Let's just give in and take it easy. Easy does it. All of those cool fucking things, man. Grab onto one of those and do it.
Right on. Well, I love you, Gabby, and I hope to have
Yeah,
you on
man.
here again. And
Thank you.
to everybody out there, tune in next episode for more recovery fun. I love you. Catch you later, everybody. Please help us help others. If you like what you've seen here today, please subscribe and share this podcast and help us get to 100 followers. We're looking for interaction with our audience. So please email recoveryfreedomrising@gmail.com or contact Milan South Okanagan Starcic on Facebook with questions, topic suggestions, or just comments. We'd love to hear from you.